And as soon as I heard the sirens and saw the fire truck, so when you call emergency services, um, all emergency services arrive. So that the fire trucks, the paramedics, and the police arrive. All three of them arrive when you call 911. I saw the flavors that she had purchased, and the first ingredient said cashew drink, right? Cashew milk, cashew drink. I just didn't, I couldn't leave her, right? So at the, an emotional and I guess just from this decision that I made was that I have to make sure that my parents are okay and that everybody around us is okay. So I'm going to take the reins here.
Hello and welcome to the Making Sane podcast. I'm joined by Joey Salmingo, and he's an ex-chef turned TV host, allergy advocate, and founder of F.A.T.E. How are you doing, Joey?
Doing well, Daniel. Thank you so much for having me here. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. Obviously, it'd be great, obviously, kind of talk about obviously a bit about your journey, obviously being an ex-chef turned TV host, but also kind of the F.A.T.E. Foundation and kind of the tragedy what happened to Joanna today. So, but if we start from kind of the very beginning for the listeners, can we talk about a bit like an introduction to yourself?
Yeah, no problem. So, hi, I'm Joey Salmingo. I guess in the where the story begins, where it kind of attaches to everything is so for I guess for the first 15 years of my adult life, when I could start working, I worked in restaurants. I started at McDonald's, working fast food. I think that was almost everybody's first job in North America. Um, And then, I stayed in the restaurant business. I worked at various different corporate restaurants throughout my teenage years. Ended up going to chef school because that was, well, first of all, I was a troubled youth. So I think cooking was the only thing that kind of kept me out of trouble, which is a very common story, believe it or not. And I cooked professionally for, I want to say maybe almost 2 decades, going from corporate restaurants. And then in the latter part of it, I partnered with some friends of mine, and we ran two restaurants, one after the other, not two at the same time, but we did the independent restaurateur thing for a little while. And then and in between that time, I'm a multitasker. I actually fell in love with, it actually started with music, which enabled me to go to school to become an audio engineer. So all the while I was chefing, I was actually in film school learning how to put music and sounds into television, and then I fell in love with television. So uh, I had many interests, as you can see. Not to elongate the story too much. So eventually, along the way, I found myself wanting to pursue film and television professionally. And that brought me to, I guess, the last decade of my life where I've been doing it professionally. And more recently, I started at the bottom, as they say, and I was a commercial actor for a bit. And found myself selling coffee and fun random things, and then yeah, exactly. And then somewhere along the lines, I found myself literally selling things on television, and I was on the shopping channel for 5 years. So the equivalent, I guess, in the UK is QVC. Yeah, so I was on there for 5 years, and that gave me my live television experience because everything was recorded previous to that. And
Was that a completely different experience then? Obviously, like doing it live in comparison to obviously where you can edit and cut it to make you what like tell a certain way. Was that a lot would you say more difficult doing it live?
definitely more difficult in the beginning because you're going from being able to make mistakes and say, okay, well, let me start again, to you got one shot at it's kind of like theater, right? You only have one shot at it in theater. So it's the same thing with live television, in that respect, even though it was as frivolous as, selling bed sheets and stuff like that. But it did give me a lot of experience doing live. And then again, not to elongate the story too much, I found myself finding other opportunities to do live, which brought me to doing entertainment. So I was able to, do the Oscars red carpets and visit the Grammys and do a lot of things in Hollywood, and that that was um, that was more recently. Like I was doing that professionally. I was living in Los Angeles for. I'm from Toronto, by the way, but I was living in Los Angeles the last couple of years. So, needless to say, I had a very busy and lucrative lifestyle, just given everything that I've done in the past. But obviously, more recently, doing Hollywood news is very up to the minute, up to the second. Anything happens.
Yeah, it sounds like that. I remember I've read your bio now a few times, and I was like, you seem like a very busy guy. Like, I mean, with the whole like cooking, where did that kind of come from? Was that through your family? Were your family kind of big cooks, and that passion kind of got passed on to yourself?
You know what? My dad was always a big cook in the family. My mom too, but my mom actually prefers baking over cooking. But my mom's also a great cook. So both my parents were great cooks growing up, and I kind of found myself just being interested as a youth, just being interested in what my dad was cooking, what my mom was baking at the time, and combine that with just being troubled in my teenage years. You kind of just fall back to it because it just it keeps you distracted, and it's not as um mundane as sitting at a desk, which, not to knock anyone that sits at a desk, but for me, that someone that had a very short attention span, it was a great thing for me. So we have this thing in Canada. It's called a co-op program, and it's usually in the later years of high school, and it was strictly reserved for troubled youth like myself, kids that didn't go to class and just didn't do their homework. So they actually put you in the workforce, and that allowed us to sort of get some real world experience. So they actually put me at a hotel kitchen, and that's where I actually learned all of my skills. And this was all before I went to chef school. So I had a very early start at learning the ins and outs of running kitchens, and learning to, put ingredients together and whatnot.
Yeah, well, I think what was really interesting, obviously, you went to Toronto Film School as well, and obviously you had lots of experience kind of behind the lens. So was it quite an interesting shift then, obviously, from kind of working behind the lens to obviously get in front of the lens? Was that a natural kind of was that something you always quite enjoyed being in front of the lens and obviously presenting and hosting?
You know what? It's so funny. I think back many, many years when I was a kid, and my dad had this little Sony Hi8 camcorder, and I remember distinctly setting it up at home with my sister, and I would do fake newscasts on a cardboard box, and I would
That's
report
amazing.
about nothing. Like, I don't know, it was the dumbest things at the time. Yeah. And I remember that, I'm like, "Wow, I had no idea that that would transpire into my adult life, into my professional life at all." So, yes, I think it was always in my blood. If you ask my friends, I think they would tell you that I was always an attention seeker growing up. And what bigger platform than to be on national television? So, yeah, I think it was just in me.
It's quite interesting. It's quite funny when you hear about these vloggers now. Like, I mean, the really, really successful ones were doing it as a kid, like you said, like 12, 13, with a handheld camera, talking absolute nonsense to the camera. But now they've built a massive platform off the back of that and made a lot of money along the way. So yeah, it's quite interesting that kind of that passion from a young age. So when you did decide to kind of move to LA, was that more of a career opportunity for you in terms of being on TV and getting on the big shows? I know you worked with E as well. Was that like the opportunity to kind of?
So over the last, I want to say, what's it, 2020 now? I guess in the last 5 years, I guess you could say, I had a lot of opportunities to travel for work. So I did, very early on. I went to Asia and did a reality show. I was a producer, and my cousin who lives in the United States, lives in Los Angeles. She is a very high level production manager within the NBC Universal, I guess, organization. So she presented me with a couple of opportunities over the years, saying, "Hey, do you want to come down and hang out first of all?" And then it turned into, "Hey, do you want to come and see how we do things. And then eventually those opportunities came to being on camera, even with the people that I met down there in other aspects. So I was on and off between Toronto and Los Angeles right at the beginning, obviously, which turned into, you know what, I'm wanting to seek more opportunities here. Uh, so why not make the move? So it was very timely because my best friend, who also my business partner, producing partner of mine, he had just purchased a house in Los Angeles with his wife. So at the same time, we kind of planned it, where it's like, well, you know what, we're gonna move on this day. Um, so let's plan it. So he and his wife ended up flying over, I guess a month in advance, and then we packed as much as we could into my car, and then we drove the two of us. Yeah, we had a great road trip. It was the two of us, and we drove from Toronto to Los Angeles. It was an epic experience for the both of us because we had grown in the industry together, but we also were continuing in the industry together, and obviously also great friends as well. So it was a great experience.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite interesting as well. Obviously, you obviously done some cooking shows as well. So obviously that whole experience of obviously being a chef, obviously you kind of use that being on show. I know you did a show like off the menu.
They've always, for some reason, television and food have always intertwined, like they've always woven together. No matter how much I try to stir away from food, because like being a content creator, I'm like, oh, well, I got to stick to one thing. So I'm like, okay, well, the food thing is great, but that's behind me now. So let me focus on doing entertainment and television. And no matter how much I try to steer away from it, food always finds a way to intertwine itself with my profession. So I said, you know what? Let it be, right?
It's great to kind of get a bit more kind of a background about yourself and kind of obviously being this a TV chef and obviously a host. But obviously that all kind of come to a halt in August of 2018, following the tragedy of what happened to your sister Joanna. Could we paint like a bit of a picture of what happened on that day? Because obviously she went out for an ice cream with her mum.
I'll go a little bit more detailed into it because there's so many little details of the story that all just kind of intertwine with it with everything. So as I mentioned, I was living in Los Angeles at the time, and my agent had called me and said, "Can you come back to Toronto for a week or 2 weeks? Because um, there's a network that would like to see you for a particular show." So I said, "Sure, no problem. I'll fly down. I'll set a 2 week time limit for myself, and I'll fly down." So I ended up flying back home, obviously staying in my family's house because I had already sold my apartment here in Toronto at the time. And yeah, so I was living at home for 2 weeks. It was great. I hadn't seen them in a while. It was a good time to be home. Um, and I had gone through sort of the motions with that particular story. So I met my agent, I met the network, and blah blah blah, and they were coming to a decision. They were making a decision of whether or not they were going to pick me or this other person. And then the second week was coming close to an end, and I called my agent. I was like, what's the story here? Because I have to go back. So she contacted the network and they said, look, just give us a little bit more time. We're just trying to figure things out. So I pushed my flight another 2 weeks. So this is like the end of June. Yeah. So this is June now. Sorry, I arrived in June, and now I pushed it. So now we're into July, right? So mid July. Um, and again, that 2 weeks had passed. In the meantime, I'm here just having a great time, visiting my friends, and saying, "Oh yeah, I'm here for a little while. Let's get together." Um, and then my agent calls me again, and she's like, "They need like a week and a half. They need like one more week to figure things out, and then they're really sorry." So I pushed my flight another week. I pushed it one more week. So now this takes us into the last week. No, sorry, this takes me into the first week of August, right? So um, yeah, so it was again, I was just waiting here, right? My all my stuff and my car and everything has been sitting for over a month now back in LA. Yeah, yeah, and also yeah, and also my US contacts are like, "Hey, when are you coming back?" Right? So anyway, uh August 8th, right? So this is like going into the first week of August now. August 8th. Um my sister So, sorry, I'm gonna go back a little bit because there's a little bit to the story. So, because I had come home, I had to commandeer my sister's car, right? But that was fine because my sister had the same routine. She was working 2 jobs. She was a supervisor at a drugstore, and then she was also a receptionist at a hair salon. So the routine is I would drop her off at the hair salon in the morning, and then her boyfriend would pick her up, take her to the second job if she was working that day, and then her boyfriend would take her home, right? And that was the routine every day. So I drop her off in the morning. I could do my thing, whatever. So that day, same routine. I dropped her off at work, and then her boyfriend Mark was coming home, coming back here to drop her off. And in between picking her up from work, they had picked up some Greek food at a place that they always go to, right? And then they had gone to Whole Foods to pick up dessert. So the thing about my sister, especially around that time, is she was very health conscious. She had cut out tons of things out of her diet just to be healthier. She had eczema, a very, very, like, serious eczema. So she had, like, the dry skin and stuff all over her arms. There was parts of it on her face at some as well. Um, so anyway, she had cut out red meat, she had cut out dairy, she was eating more greens, she was just trying to be healthier. And yeah,
More healthy, yeah.
and she actually was in the best shape of her life at that time, right? So it was working for her. So she had gone to Whole Foods to pick up dessert, and Whole Foods at that time was featuring a new dessert that was serve yourself in the cold section. It was called mochi. Now, mochi is a Japanese dessert. There's typically ice cream on the inside. It's made of like a spongy rice on the outside. It's a cake, but made from rice. It's not rice on the outside, so it's a rice cake on the outside. Um,
I'm glad you explained that because I don't think in the UK, I mean, me personally, I've never heard of it before until yeah.
Yeah, if you Google it, so mochi, Mochi, you'll see what it actually looks like and what fillings it has and what it's typically made of. It's a very popular
Dish, yeah.
Japanese dessert, right? If you were to go for sushi, they most likely have it on the dessert menu, right? Anyway, so she had come home with these mochis. Actually, one detail that I left out is these mochis were labeled as vegan, right? So it was perfect for her. Non-dairy, non-dairy dessert that she could take in and not feel guilty about, right? So she had come home with these mochis in a container. It was serve yourself, so you had to grab tongs and put them in a box, and then they weigh it and etc. And she had come home with them. Now this was around maybe 8 p.m., 8:30 p.m. My parents and I had just finished dinner. So she had came home. Hi Mark. Hi Joe. Nice to see you. Mark leaves as he usually does. And Joanna, my sister, um, put her stuff on the table. We were watching TV. And because she had come home from a long day of work, she had gone upstairs to decompress. I don't know. What do you do when you come home from work? She I'm assuming, like, she takes off her contacts, changes her clothes, etc., etc. Um Sorry, I left one part out. Actually, you might need to edit this. So, she had come home. We said hi to Mark, goodbye to Mark. Mark left, and then she brought the mochi down to the kitchen table, and she said, "Look, Whole Foods has mochi now. Let's share it." Me, I'm not a big fan, but my mom was like, "Okay, let's split it." So she had purchased 6 pieces. They're about the size. they're just as big as a macaroon, right? And they're like spongy. So she had cut them in half, and then my mom and her had split it, right? And I didn't even bother having one because I was busy watching TV. And then my sister and my mom shared, I guess, the 2 or 4 pieces that they were eating. And then she went upstairs to decompress, right? Take her contacts out, change her clothes, whatever. And then the way that I remember it is she had come down the stairs, and she was stumbling down the stairs, and she was gasping for air, right? I At first I thought she was whispering, right? But my mom immediately knew what was happening. So, like, if I replay it in my head, which I hate doing that, but so she had come down the stairs, and all I heard was "Mom," and I thought she was whispering, but I guess my mom had looked at her and realized something was wrong because she said, "Joanna, what did you eat?"
And she knew straight away. Yeah.
Immediately, my mom was like, she knew that she was having an allergic reaction. Um, and her EpiPen was in her hand. So as soon as my mom said that, "Joanna, what did you eat?" Joe, to me, call 911. As soon as she said that, I looked at her and I looked at my phone and I didn't know what was going on. And it took me a second to process as I was calling 911. So I was on the phone, with 911, and all while this was happening, uh, I guess, because my sister was struggling, and like her throat was closing up. She's going through,
Where the oxygen, like, yeah, you can't breathe, and yeah.
so her throat was closing up, obviously very quickly, and my mom had sort of come to support her from behind, right, and And all the while, she's, like, fiddling with the EpiPen that is in her hand and trying to fiddle with it to figure out what was like, if sh had she activated it, did she use it or not? I'll return to that in a second about the EpiPen. Um, but so in the meantime, she eventually passed out, right? Because her throat had already closed up. And my mom, who is a nurse, my mom's been a nurse for 40 years, right? Obviously started doing CPR compressions, right, to get the blood flowing. Because for those that don't know, when you stop breathing, your heart stops, and that stops pumping blood, pumping oxygen to all the parts that need it, right? And what felt like eternity, which was maybe only 8 to 10 minutes, the ambulance finally arrived. We don't live far from the hospital here. But obviously it felt like an eternity. I remember, so the emergency services woman had stayed on the phone with me until 911 arrived. And obviously I'm just walking around, like walking between the balcony, or not the balcony, the front porch to inside, watching my mom, waiting for the ambulance and paramedics to arrive. And as soon as I heard the sirens and saw the fire truck, so when you call emergency services, um, all emergency services arrive. So the fire trucks, the paramedics, and the police arrive. All three of them arrive when you call 911, at least here anyway. So at first the fire truck came, because firefighters here are first responders as well, right? So first the fire truck came, and I screamed at the top of my lungs, "Here, here." And then they had driven right by, but I realize now that it was because the paramedics were right behind them. So they just came just to make sure that, just in case the ambulance got stuck somewhere. So that's why it happens that way. So fire trucks had gone by, paramedics right behind them, pulled in. Paramedics rushed in. We explained what was going on. I hung up with emergency services, and they took over CPR compressions. Um, and then I could just remember the chatter that was happening among them, saying that I don't have a pulse. Um, they had to defibrillate her, right? To stabilize her, and I use that term very loosely, stabilize, right? Because if she had died on the spot, the outcome would have been different. They would have taken her somewhere else. So the objective was to get her heart started again, stabilize her so that they could bring her to emergency at the hospital, which is ultimately what happened. So they defibrillated her, they got her heart a very low pulse, and they said, "Okay, we need to go to emergency."
So was she in the ICU at that point? I mean, what at that point did you feel potentially she could have recovered from it? I know it's really hard. I can't imagine obviously what you went through and obviously witnessing that, but the kind of the first day in ICU, what was kind of going through your head at that point? Did you feel like that potentially she could have got over it?
So see, the thing is that at that time, I knew my sister had allergies. Obviously, we grew up together, but I'd never seen her have any type of allergic reaction outside of scratching. I was like, "Oh, I think I'm allergic to that." That's the extent that I saw. That was literally the first time I had ever seen anything like that. But yeah, but also I had no idea what anaphylaxis actually was. Like what happens during an allergic reaction? I had no idea. So, sure, I saw her pass out, but yeah, at the time I was like, okay, like, the doctors will help her, right? But it wasn't until when we got to emergency, they obviously brought her to the ER emergency room. Um, and forgive the graphic nature of these descriptions, but like, we were in front of the operating room doors and she started having seizures. And I found out later that it was because she uh she died from oxygen deprivation to to her brain, right? So because she had gone so long without having oxygen to the brain, she started to seize in the ER, and they had to, you know, um, I guess, inject her with epinephrine to subside the anaphylaxis, and I guess a bunch of other stuff. So it wasn't until maybe I guess like 2 or 3 hours after the initial reaction that we ended up in ICU, and not realizing how long we were going to be there. Because at the time I thought she was in a coma, right? I thought that she would wake up at some point, whether it be a year from now or a day from now or something, right? But what I didn't actually realize is that she was brain dead because of the anaphylaxis.
A lot of people just don't understand that as well. And obviously with Joanna and there's a few very similar stories where I've interviewed people in the UK, and that when someone goes into anaphylactic shock, like you said, like it starves the brain of oxygen. And the longer it starves the brain of oxygen, that's obviously the more serious it can get. And it's just crazy that I think a lot of people just don't understand that. You know what I mean? They don't understand the severities about allergies, and like you said, when someone goes into anaphylactic shock, it is life or death. Right?
Yeah, if I think back on it, the amount of time that had passed between her passing out for the first time and her being loaded onto the ambulance, I want to say that was maybe 20 minutes, right? And that's like, if you have zero oxygen passing to your brain for 2 minutes, that's dangerous. And that could place you into a different um brain state, for lack of a better phrase, right? But 20 minutes, now thinking back on it, 20 minutes, I remember distinctly when we got pushed into her room in the ICU. that one of the first things that the doctor said they were going to do was an EEG test. And I don't remember what it stands for, but I know what it tests the electrical signals of your brain, right? So they had done this test, and the way that they had explained it was they had shown us like I guess the scan of it, and they said a normal functioning brain, it looks like fireworks, right? In terms of electrical signals that your brain gives off. But when you looked at my sister's scan, Joanna's scan, it was dark. It was pitch black. It was almost as if the lights were turned off, so to speak, right? So this, remember, Daniel, this is arriving at the hospital the evening um, of the reaction. So the second we got there, she was already scientifically and medically brain dead, right? Because 20 minutes, right? Without
Yeah, like you said, it's the longer it is, the more scary and scary. You know what I mean? I can't imagine what like kind of going through that. And I mean, you spent 17 days in ICU with by Joe on his side every day. I mean, I can't. Yeah.
I mean, again, like because I didn't know I didn't know anything about food allergies other than, oh, if you eat something that you're allergic to, it's bad, right? So in this entire time period that we were there, um I again hoping for her, she'll wake up or something, the doctors will find a way to, I don't know, wake her up or something. And I just didn't I couldn't leave her, right? So at the from an emotional and I guess just from this decision that I made was that I have to make sure that my parents are okay and that everybody around us is okay. So I'm going to take the reins here. So I said, Mom and Dad, you go home and you go to and get some rest and you do whatever you're going to do. I'm going to manage this situation. So I stayed there um, for technically 16 days. Sorry, 17 days, 16 nights. Um, and I was there all day, 22 hours a day. I only went home to take a shower. So the way that it happened was my everybody would go home for the evening, um, and then they would come back the next day. I would stay all day there with them, and then maybe around 8 or 9 p.m., I would go home to shower while my parents were still at the hospital. I would shower, decompress, and then come right back to the hospital so that my parents can go home and go to bed. And that was the cycle of things. Throughout those days, people were coming by, visiting, obviously dropping off stuff, saying get well, and, you know, uh, just hoping for the best and people showing their support. And obviously, for us learning that her condition was just worsening because obviously she was on a respirator because she couldn't breathe on her own. um Man, her face, like I just remember, I mean, I remember
I just can't
everything
imagine. I
honestly
mean,
about that time.
so it's just. I mean, it must be so hard. I mean, in regards to when it got to that kind of 70th day, can this might sound like a silly question, but she can still hear you, but when you are like by her side, and I think that's something from interviewing other people which have been in that same situation, and kind of speaking to them, because I know that they can still hear them, but like you said, after that, when you've got to make that decision, I can't. Yeah,
Spoke to her, well, I spoke to her all the time, but like, in the moments where where everybody had left and it was just us again in the room. I would sit by her bedside and I would tell her everything that I was sorry about. Um, because big brothers can be jerks, right? I was a jerk big brother, right? I mean, it's just the unsaid thing with siblings, right? Like the older siblings always going to be. Anyway, but yeah, like I always spoke to her and I fully believe that she could hear us. There were moments where, you know, like I would see tears uh r- roll down her eyes, come from her eyes, and then the nurses will have a medical explanation for it, obviously, but like I fully believe that she wanted to get out. She wanted to, is like she was trapped inside of a box or something and just wanted to get out. And I see her, like when I picture just those moments, I know she could hear us right up until the moment where we had to make a decision of what we were going to do.
I imagine, I mean, what you went through, and I mean, the way you've kind of painted the picture, kind of feel kind of all your emotions. Yeah, I can't imagine, obviously, as a family, kind of that whole experience and having to kind of go through them experiences and emotions again. The reaction was caused by the cashew milk, and it wasn't from kind of what I've kind of spoke to you. It wasn't kind of labeled very clearly on the glass. Is that correct?
After the first night in the hospital, um, we well me and my mom had gone back home while Mark, my sister's partner, and my dad stayed at the hospital. So me and my mom had gone home to do some investigation. So um, we had asked Mark, what did you guys eat? We said, oh, we had the Greek food, but they always go to that Greek place, and that guy knows that my sister has allergies, right? So process of elimination is the dessert. So we went to the freezer because she had put the leftovers back in the freezer, and then we had looked at the container, but the container had nothing on it other than how much she paid for it. So we suspected that it was that because that excuse me. We suspected that it was that because that was the only other thing that she had eaten. So there was no way of knowing that evening. So I said, well, you know what? I'm going to go to Whole Foods first thing in the morning, which is what I did. So I went to Whole Foods. Um, I stood at the door and waited for them to open. Like they open at, I guess, 8. I was there at 7:55 waiting for them to open, right? And I went straight to the display that had the mochi and looked around at it. And I'll give you the photos of what I took pictures of, right? So it's a freezer, a serve yourself freezer, a couple of tongs, some empty boxes for you to fill yourself. And then when you look in the freezer, you see the different flavors and everything is kind of, mixed together. They're all different colors, but everything's sort of mixed together. And it shows you the vegan flavors on this side and then all the regular flavors on the other side. And then I was looking for an ingredient list, and then I guess, attached to the shelf, there's it looks like a bunch of recipe cards, right? And they were attached to a ring, and then those were the ingredients of each flavor. So you would have to, grab the recipe book and flip through the flavor that you were getting. And finally, I saw the flavors that she had purchased, and the first ingredient said cashew drink, right? Cashew milk, cashew drink, whatever. And I took pictures. I sent them to my mom right away. I was like, this is it. This is what did it. right? And then I just obviously sped back to the hospital, and that's where we began to sort of discuss, how everything happened the way that it happened. So yes, it was due to her nut allergy. So Joanna was allergic to all nuts, tree nuts and peanuts. She was allergic to seafood, all seafood actually, so shellfish and regular fish as well. And well, and then she had like the more milder allergies to like dust and pet hair and stuff like that too. But those the for in terms of food, those were the serious anaphylactic, allergies that she had, in combination to the eczema that she had as well.
So it's crazy to think like the way the information was actually displayed on the glass, it didn't say like contains nuts or it's yeah, so it wasn't very clear. Obviously, the allergens were actually in the ice cream.
No, so to just add to those details, so, it wasn't until, uh, um, like, maybe a month later that I actually approached Whole Foods. So my sister had already passed away. Um, you know, we'll we'll get into the details of that, in a second. But so she had passed away. So I went to Whole Foods maybe a month later, and I said, I need to speak to your general manager of the store. General manager comes up, and I said, is there somewhere private that we can speak? But he was a little bit weirded out because he's like, what is this guy here to talk about? So we found a corner in their staff area, and I said, I just wanted to let you know that, my sister came here on this day, purchased this mochi that you guys have on sale. She was allergic to it, and she died 2 weeks ago. And obviously, extremely taken aback, super empathetic. And he's like, oh my gosh, like, I'm so sorry. Like, what can I do? And I said, I need you to put me in touch with whoever is in charge of food safety for either your establishment or Whole Foods in general. And he said, 100%, here's my email, here's my business card. Um, and I didn't tell him that I had knowledge of the food industry. I just said, this is what I need you to do. Put me in touch with someone. Um, Maybe a week later or a couple of days later, I get, uh, first of all, I get a phone call from from someone, and he said, "Hi, I'm so and so from Whole Foods. I am the food safety head of Whole Foods. I heard about this. You're the manager of this store contacted me. He's like, can we set up a formal phone call in a couple of days? And I'd like to hear the story." So I said yes. We had that formal phone call. I explained to him exactly how it happened. And then I also said, and by the way, I've been in the food service and retail industry for almost 2 decades. I'm familiar with all food practices, um, for food safety, food certification, handling, even retail space. I'm familiar with all of these policies. And here's what I need you to change about your food policies. Um, and he was very supportive, obviously, to listening to me. Um, and I also recorded the conversation as well, just because I'm someone who just needs to document everything. And yeah, they were very supportive about things, and they offered to make a donation to our cause as well, which I would hope for them was just a show of support and not not anything else outside of that. Um, and And I guess I think maybe a week or 2 weeks later, I didn't hear from them after that call, and I also tried to contact him again, and he never responded until much later. But then a friend of mine sent me a text message and said, "Look at what I found at Whole Foods." And the signs had changed. of the display. So now instead of the flavors just saying the flavor, it actually said, you know, salted caramel contains nuts. All they did was change the thing, and I'll give you the photos of it. Maybe you can put it on the screen. But there was a before photo that I had taken and then an after photo, and I said, "Oh, well, they never well, yeah, they changed a few things, but now I was curious to find out if that was, just in my province. Was it across the board? Because he said that he was the food safety head for the United States, Canada, and the UK, right? So he was in charge of all Whole Foods globally. So anyway, so they had made some changes, which was great. I personally did my own investigations as well. I even made a video about it and put it on YouTube, um, just telling the story and sharing my experiences with dealing with them. Um, and for the most part, I commended them for making the change. He eventually contacted me afterwards to tell me about the changes they had made. Um, but also, and as much as I commend them for it, it also struck me as, this is something that needs to be addressed for all companies, all industries, all restaurants across the board, because food safety practices are, uh, they're overlooked in some cases because people people and especially businesses go through the motions of things because they have to.
And I think it differs a bit, doesn't it, from like I think like country to country really in regards to kind of like the food regulations. I know in the UK we've got Natasha's law which is coming to practice. So if it is made on site, it's got to declare the top 14 allergens, which I don't know, do you have a law similar to that over in Toronto?
So here's the thing about laws and policy changes here in Canada. Okay. Doesn't matter whether it's, food allergies or anything like that. Because Canada is a massive country with very few people in it. Um, I'm gonna go ahead just to offer my opinion about our government and our system is that it's a lot harder to make changes because there aren't enough people behind it to back it. If you comp Yeah, if you compare it to the United States, well, the United States also has massive landmass, but they have multiple states with tons of people. Like if you look at the landmass population ratio of the United States, it's wall to wall people, right? North, south, east, and west. It's all people. So there's tons of I guess congressmen and congresswomen and state legislators and their governments want to make changes for their communities. And I'll offer Elijah's Law um, as a as an example of it. My friends in New York, um, the Elijah Alavi Foundation, they got a law passed in New York to make sure that there were allergy protocols in the state of New York for daycares because Elijah was 3 years old and he passed away at a daycare from his dairy allergy. Um, and then the Natasha's Law, they're in the UK, fantastic. And there's other couple of organizations in the US, but when it comes to Canada, there are people that will listen, but the Canadian government, it's not that they don't care. Like I don't know enough about the processes of things, but it's really hard to get a message across because our National Food Allergy Association has tried to get these policy changes over the last little while or for the longest time because previous to my sister there had been multiple allergic reactions that have caused death in this country, and for some reason nothing really, like they have made it as far as I guess getting a book to someone for them to review it, but no changes have been made. And it's obviously really frustrating as well. I put a lot of faith into FAIR, food allergy research and education. Being the largest food allergy organization, I guess globally, even being out of the United States, but offering support and resources for food allergy families. But
And I think that's amazing. Obviously, like and I know a lot of the training. You go to different restaurants, and I've seen a few of your videos, and using obviously the tragedy, what did happen, to obviously to raise awareness now of how like different practices can kind of take it more serious, definitely in the kind of restaurant side.
So, I mean, at some point, actually, it was around the time of the funeral, where my dad had said, "Joe, we need to do something about this because this was a food allergy that killed your sister. Like, what can we do?" Um, and then we started sort of just sort of brainstorming, like, what kinds of things could we do, and just for some reason, I had set up a GoFundMe page. I guess in the beginning, it was to try to help support, funeral expenses and all that stuff, because funeral expenses are obviously the worst things to kind of endure, especially when you're not prepared for it. Um, and I think I was just looking to raise like a couple thousand bucks, like $2,000 or $3,000. And then I had checked it maybe within the week, and it was like at 10,000, and then it went up to like 15,000, and I was like, the amount of support that we were getting from people, a lot of them were obviously, our friends and our family, but a lot of them were just food allergy families that shared in our grief and our story. So I think it was just seeing that amount of support where I was like, we need to start an organization that tells the story. I didn't know what I was going to do at the time, but I was like, we need to do something. So at the time, I was like, I'm going to start the International Initiative for Food Allergy Awareness. That's what it was called.
It's
Yeah.
quite long, isn't it?
And the idea behind it was to obviously provide awareness and educate people by telling our story. And there was always a disclaimer, where we said, "Look, we are not by any means, I'm not a doctor. I barely know anything about this, but my mom's a nurse as well. But the disclaimer was, we are just relaying already available resources, stuff that you can get already. We're just telling you our story, using these resources and sharing it with you so that you know what happens during a food allergy, how you can prevent it, et cetera, et cetera." Me being a public speaker and very articulate in the way I speak, I knew that I could handle that because I'm used to public speaking anyway. Um, Also, me being a chef, a former chef, I knew that I could speak the language of people that work in restaurants and in food retail and all that stuff. And that's the thing. The culinary and chef industry, no matter where you go, is a very ego driven industry. And what I mean by that is, most chefs, because I used to be a chef, right? Most chefs are like, don't worry, I know already. I know everything that I need to know. Um, so I don't need to learn anything else. And the second you say to a restaurant body, "Oh, we have training for something," the amount of eye rolls that you get from all the employees, is like, "Oh, here's another training session." Most of us never showed up to stuff like that, right? Um, so being able to coming from that background, being able to speak that language gave me um, gave me an edge, gave me an advantage on yeah.
Have helped so much as well. I think like everything from obviously, like I said, being working in restaurants, obviously being a TV host. I think all that experience kind of built up to Fate as well in regards to having that experience and that language to know how to kind of talk about it in a way which is going to resonate with them and make them want to actually like make their ears prick up and actually be aware about the seriousness of allergies.
Being able to utilize, I guess, my knowledge of storytelling, working in the film industry and producing movies and stuff in the past, knowing how to properly tell a story, so that your audience is hooked every step of the way. Because we've all sat in front of boring movies and boring presentations, and if there's no reason for me to listen to you, I'm not going to listen to you. I'm going to spend all my time on my phone. So being able to know how to tell the story was obviously a huge advantage as well. Um, and that's also part of the reason why, Daniel, I ended up changing the name of the organization to Fate. because obviously the previous name didn't quite roll off the tongue either. But the acronym FATE stands for Food Allergy Training and Education. So that worked out perfectly. But at the same time, there's no way that you could look at my story and not think that fate had anything to do with it. Because everything that I've done in my life leading up to this point has allowed me to be able to share this message and get our message across. That's fate as well.
Yeah, and I think that's so important. And even like meeting Jan, you could say, was absolutely fate, which was kind of Joanna's childhood friend who she kind of got brought up with. And obviously, being that age as well, you probably bumped into Jan, but obviously, you would never really kind of thought about it. But she kind of got back in touch when she kind of heard or kind of come across your Facebook post and obviously wanted to kind of give the support to the family again. Um, how was that? I mean, that is fate, isn't it? You know what I mean? Some which is really, really sad has obviously brought you two very close together.
Jan is my girlfriend, my partner, and she actually grew up with Joanna, my sister. They were childhood besties, BFFs. She was always over, and they were playing and all that stuff. And obviously, me being an older brother, I'm 5 years older than my sister. You don't really pay attention, especially like when it's an older brother and a younger sister. There's rarely any commonalities there. So, so I didn't really pay attention because, they would play with, dolls and whatever other stuff that girls play with, and then I would have my boy stuff, right? So I never really paid attention to my sister or her friends when they came over or anything like that because that was her and this was me. And, obviously I remember seeing her and meeting her, and, I would obviously poke fun at them over the years. Um, and I guess, people tend to grow apart as they grow older. So in high school, they kind of lost touch, and I never really saw Jan again after that. Right. And obviously, life just went on, carried on. And when Joanna was in the hospital, I had started to share on my social media photos of us, just kind of growing up. And then it came to a point where one post had just basically told the story. As like most of you have guessed by now that my sister had suffered a tragedy, and told the entire story of what happened in an Instagram post, and then that's the one that kind of blew up and spread like wildfire. And then around, I want to say day 15, 14 or 15 in ICU, I got an email from Jan, and the email had said, "Hey Joey, um, I don't know if you remember me. I'm Jan, Joanna's friend. Um, I started seeing all these things and hearing things from people. I just wanted to reach out to you to make sure that it's not like it wasn't fake or anything like that." And she left her phone number. So I called her from the hospital. And I said, yeah, I mean, I told her the whole story. And because it was already so late at the time that we were in ICU, I had explained to her, I was like, we are letting her go. Um, she's going in for organ donation surgery, in a couple of days. But I can keep you posted on, funeral arrangements and stuff. And she's like, I need to come and see you guys. Like, can I come like support or visit in any way? So we we all ended up going home the day before during the day. Some people came over to show their support, and she came over that day, and that was the first time that I had seen her in maybe 20 years. And it was really just reconnecting and explaining the story and all that stuff. And she was there for the funeral. She was there for both viewing days. Um, and for some reason, we just stayed in touch. You know, how are you over the next little while? And we just started talking more, talking on the phone. And this was September now. Joanna's accident was in August. Um, and then by like October, we I guess you could say we were dating by October, like within a couple of months, which I look back on it now, I'm like, that's so fast. But
I was going to say, yeah, I think, do you think it brought, obviously, it must have brought you very much kind of more closer together and a more kind of personal connection as well? Because obviously, both grieving and kind of both going through this same emotion that, yeah.
history, right? She knew everything about my sister as much as I knew, right? If not maybe more, because I didn't hang out with my sister. She hang out with her, right? So, there was I guess you could say that there was the connection and the history of my sister, sort of connecting us. I mean, there's no way that you can look at that and not see that my sister had done that from the afterlife. Like, there's no way that you can't look at it in that way, and that's a stroke of fate. That's you don't even have to be spiritual to say wow to that story, right? And I continue to tell it because a lot of people sometimes ask us, oh, how'd you guys meet? And I tell that story, and by the end of the story, people's jaws are on the ground. My jaw is always on the ground because it's like, how
And
can
it's crazy, isn't it? But like how kind of like the stars align sometimes, and if even before the tragedy of obviously you being a chef and then obviously what did happen, obviously the tragedy what did happen to Joanna, but since then obviously setting up F.A.T.E and meeting Jan, it's weird at how it all kind of interlinks in a very kind of strange way, you could say. Yeah,
and
it's incredible.
and you know what? It's been almost 2 years. No, been almost 3 years now. We're going into year three. Um, and another stroke of fate, and thanks to Joanna, we are expecting a baby girl now.
Congratulations.
So I know this is going to come out closer to April, and yeah. So the fact that now we're having a girl is also just mind blowing to me. Like, I'm getting emotional even just thinking about it because, like, just everything is just a stroke of fate, and like thanks to my sister and all that stuff. But just to sort of get back to and just to sort of close off the part of fate as an organization. um the being able to sort of share the story with the skills that I have allow us to get the message across in a very impactful way where people are engaged from beginning to end while telling the story. And before COVID, we were busy. We were going to schools, we were going to restaurants, we were speaking to other organizations like camps, foster home organizations, like speaking to the parents that would be fostering children. Um, just so many different organizations that wanted the knowledge, um, especially coming from a food service background. There were a lot of restaurants that wanted the knowledge too. So um, post COVID, it's been difficult because no one you can't gather anymore, and it's been pretty difficult to get the message across. So you know, I'm thinking about, well, not thinking about, I know I have to sort of transition to doing digital presentations. So, um, I mean,
Very strange world, isn't it? How a lot of it, like it's all kind of going more. Even with the podcasts, like I was so used to doing it with the guests kind of sat with me. But I mean, with it being online now, like you said, like I can do interviews to people like
yeah,
yourself from all over the world. So yeah, I just want to say thank you so much, Joey, for kind of coming on the podcast to kind of share Joanna's story and yourself, and hopefully it really kind of resonates with people from kind of around the world that allergies are really serious. So yeah, thank you again for coming. coming on the podcast today.
My pleasure, Daniel. Thank you so much for having me, and it was really great to share the story. And I know a lot of, uh, well, I mean, you had said it earlier that you weren't you were are sometimes careful with how you bring up the point of telling the story. But as I mentioned to you, even off camera, the whole point of this is to share the story, no matter how painful it is, because we have to paint a picture of how serious this epidemic is. And awareness, like, I think we had this conversation yesterday in the pre-interview, which was, if you don't live with food allergies, you don't care, right? Not in a negative way, but not maliciously, but it's not part of your daily routine to be aware of it. Even if you work in, especially if you work in the restaurant industry, if you don't live with someone or have food allergies yourself, it's not
Yeah,
on
if
your
you,
mind, right? So
yeah, it's not the first thing you kind of think about when you kind of wake up, and the last thing you think about before you go to bed. It's, you know what I mean? Like, if you, like you said, if you don't know a family member or friend, then you're not going to go the kind of severities of it at all. Like, yeah.
just again, just telling the story and sharing the story hopefully gets people to sort of wake up and say, maybe I should be a little bit more conscious when I plan a party or when I go out to eat with someone, um, and whatnot. So, my resources are global; they are available to everyone. So feel free to share that, because I'm
And
happy to
absolutely,
share
and
it too.
like, and absolutely, and I think it is, like you said, so important to kind of talk about these stories. And like you said, it can be quite painful, bringing up the kind of memories and the kind of emotions of what happened on that day. But like you said, it's so important to kind of make people aware. So yeah, thanks again, Joey, for coming on the podcast, and I'm sure we'll stay in touch soon. Yep.
Thank you.